Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
Welcome back to the Advancement Podcast. Hey, if you enjoy what you are listening to, go and click subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast. And if you have time, could you rate us on that podcasting platform? It helps everything. Podcasting platform. It helps you. It helps get the word out about the advancement. And if you subscribe, it helps the content come every Tuesday and Thursday. If you're watching, click subscribe or like on YouTube or Facebook. And again, you get to see our beautiful faces in high definition. Every Tuesday and Thursday.
Maybe not.
My name is Todd Barr. I'm the host of the Advancement Podcast here, as always, with my trusty sidekick, Timothy Dominic.
We're a sidekick again today, huh?
Yeah, you're the Robin to my Batman. Although I don't want to see you in green tights. That'd be weird, but you know, it's fine.
Good.
They can't see you below the waist, so they don't know if you're not wearing your Robin uniform today.
This is Zoom. I mean, hey, you know,
and it's audio. Yeah,
this is the culture where you don't have to wear. You can wear whatever you want as far as shorts on.
Yeah. Now everybody's picturing us that's just listening in a Batman and Robin costumes.
Well, they wouldn't. Well, first of all, that wouldn't work. You'd have to be Robin because you're shorter.
No. Oh, wow. Well, be liberated, Tim. You know, we're not into these limiting features of us, you know. I'm not defined as a person by my height. Isn't that what the millennials say?
Well, you're the millennial, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, I talked about I pulled out some statistics on millennials and Gen Xers and boomers yesterday, and the congregation had a whole lot of fun with that. So.
Well, that's good. Yeah. So today it's good for us. We're good for us. It is good for us.
It's good for us today here on the Advancement Podcast.
We're glad to be welcoming back for another episode with us, Dr. Jeannie Clarkson. Dr. Jeannie is a professional counselor and PhD, and she has two counseling centers, one in Michigan, one in Ohio, and she is a phenomenal resource to the body of Christ and to church and to church leaders. And she's also the author of The Emotionally Intelligent Pastor, a guide for clergy and other church leaders. And our friend since COVID, we met at the beginning of COVID. How are you this morning, Dr. Jeannie? Is it still morning where you are? Yes, it's still morning.
Yes, it is. I'm doing well. How are you?
We're good.
Isn't that so weird that we call somebody that we've never met in person before our friend, but we've met over Zoom across how many thousands of miles?
I don't know that it's thousands.
It's
close, maybe close to 1,000.
Okay. Well, you talk and I'll look it up.
He's going to look it up.
That's wonderful. We can have friends everywhere now.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, that's a entire conversation that I've been having with pastors and trying to figure out how to do during COVID, during quarantine, and that we've talked about building relationships and doing small groups and things over video like this and the effectiveness of it. But anyway, so it's good to have you back with us, Dr. Jeannie. We've been talking about being emotionally intelligent for the last couple of episodes. If you haven't listened,
1,200 miles to Michigan. Boom.
1,200 miles.
So at least 1,000.
Okay.
I did to Michigan State because I don't know where she is.
Okay. What's the closest city? What city are you in?
Lambertville, Michigan.
There you go. He's getting
it's
serious. It's
going to be a little less.
There you go. So, Dr. Jeannie's been
right at 1,000.
Right at 1,000.
1,010.
There you go. All right, okay. All right.
Don't ever doubt me again, Tim.
Well, you said thousands.
Well, I was a little much, but it was 1,000.
I'm not doubting you, sir.
Yeah, you were until I Googled it.
Well, I know that it's only 3,000 miles across the U.S. So I'm like, oh, okay. But that said, Dr. Jeannie's been helping us as we've been talking about being emotionally intelligent as pastors and leaders. In our the first episode, we spoke about what does it mean to actually be emotionally intelligent, and this idea of being first aware of what's going on inside of us, and then picking up on what's going on inside of people, and how this will help us in our leadership and in our communication. And we talked last time about this idea of mastering yourself, which is a matter of both of our mind, our heart, and our words. Our words are a reflection of our heart and our mind, and that these things we need to, we talked at the beginning, I was still kind of pondering this idea that the scripture talks about self-control, and to be emotionally intelligent and to behave, maybe more than be emotionally intelligent, requires the spiritual discipline of self-control. And we're going to kind of continue that. We're going to flip a little bit. We've been talking mostly about me as a leader, what we do for ourselves, but there's this side now where we're going to start talking about the other side of the relationship. If I'm working on my emotional intelligence and becoming better at looking inward and dealing with me, well, now how do I pick up on the other side? And this is what Dr. Jeannie in her book calls relational mastery. Dr. Jeannie, I remember one of my mentors of probably a little over a decade ago, we were in a meeting, and I don't remember what I said, what I did. What was going on in the meeting wasn't important, because it was the conversation afterwards where he said, dude, you got to learn to read the room, man. You came in here with a plan, but when your plan didn't work, you just plowed right ahead. You got to read the room. And so this idea of relational mastery and being emotionally intelligent, this is a journey I'm on. That's why I've read the book. That's why
I think
my wife bought me this book and said, hey, you ought to read this.
I think for us high D type A people, it's hard for us sometimes to slow down and read the room.
It's true.
We like to kick the door and say, we're here.
Well, I think the more visionary a leader is, the more they've got to drive forward and just get her done. Get her done.
That country life is really wearing off on you.
That's a nationally known comedian. That people...
I get it.
Okay.
He's also said, you might be a redneck, right?
No, that was his friend. Anyway, so Dr. Jeannie, why don't you dig us out of this hole we're digging over here?
Get us good episode here.
And help us and first help us by defining what we mean by relational mastery.
Okay. Well, let me start with the second half, like you said, with others, is relational insight, and then relational mastery.
Okay.
And this is the fun part. It seemed like before our last one, we were talking about self-control and a lot of work, but this is really the fun part when we get to put it all together. And relational insight is really tuning into what's going on with others. It's reading the social cues. It's reading the room, taking the pulse, picking up on others' emotional reactions, whether it be individually or in a group or in a culture or a community. And that helps us then to the relational mastery part. That gives us information then to know how to speak to that group, to know how to interact with that group, to know how to manage those relationships wisely.
You just said something that I don't remember reading in your book that strikes me. We don't have time to dig into it today, but the idea that tuning into what individuals and groups, but when you said tuning into cultures, that's it.
If you want to speak into the culture, you have to know how the culture thinks. We can see this a lot in the Apostle Paul. He spoke differently when he was speaking to a Gentile culture or a
Yes,
Jewish
yes.
culture. And so when we speak into cultures, we have to be able to speak their language.
That's good. Okay, so that's what you mean when the first step is relational insight that leads towards relational mastery. So what do we mean by that, and what are the practical steps that our listeners can start doing to apply and learn how to be to master that side of our world?
Okay, well, the relational insight piece is really about listening, about listening carefully and tuning in. You know, in our culture, most of us are good at talking. And a lot of times when somebody else is talking, we're rehearsing what we're going to say next.
What? No way. I can't believe that
So,
people would do that.
unfortunately, we often don't have that good of listening skills. And
What?
but probably you learn some of those if you've gone to seminary where you read, but you can practice that to really listen to people, to try to pick up more on what they're saying, to ask questions and really tune into what's going on is the relational insight. And, you know, I was going to say this being good with people, sometimes it seems like a mystery. We look at people who just seem to naturally, you know, influence, and they're just so good with people. And sometimes it seems like, well, that just must be a gift that we don't have. You know, some people do it naturally, but the truth of the matter is that it really all boils down to skills, and we can all learn to do those skills better.
Skills.
And listening is the number one, and tuning in. And the relational mastery piece is the ability to manage relationships wisely. Scripture says a lot about how we relate with others. But in that section, I listed 4 main things that pastors really have to do well. And that is build trust, manage expectations, empower others, and manage conflict. Now, there are plenty more things like preach relevant messages, lead change, but those are 4 basic. And I think we can look at the one on manage conflict to really illustrate more about relational mastery. But I'm going to pause because I thought I said a lot there.
Well, I think you did say there's so much there we could really unpack. Conflict, we've been talking about doing some episodes on conflict because that's most pastors.
Conflict doesn't happen in churches.
No, it doesn't. But most pastors avoid conflict rather than deal with it. They don't deal with it until they have to, which by then it's often too late. You know, we wait till
the fire's gone too far.
We wait till the war started
to
have peace talks. We don't start.
We're like America. We wait till halfway through the World War and like, all right, let's get into this.
I find you emphasize the word skills, which I want our listeners to pick up on that these are skills. That means these are not things, they don't have to be natural tendencies. We can learn these and we can master these. There are some things that are innate in us. There are some things that God puts in us, but these are skills. I remember historically in my life, I was not a great listener. I
just don't see that, Tim.
I know.
I just don't see it.
But on this journey of learning to be a coach and a consultant, you know, I had to take classes and I had to read books, and I had to develop the skill of listening.
Yeah.
And these are skills. Conflict management is a skill. Listening is a skill. These things are. So if you're listening, don't say, well, I just never been good at that and I don't know how to get better. I think that is a key word for us to recognize. This is a skill that makes it learnable over time and is something that can be mastered.
Right.
So that's huge. Thank you for using that word.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you
Yes.
think
And
that
so, go
the
ahead.
best way for us to, you think the best way for it to represent to our audience the idea of relational mastery is to walk through a conflict scenario?
I think it's a good illustration because in conflict, the thing of it is conflict is going to happen in every
Yes.
church. Hopefully they're minor, sometimes they're major, but how you manage conflict can really make or break your ministry.
That's a big one.
Well, unfortunately, most of us, you're right. I think it can make or break. Um, you know, it's part of the reason why pastor terms have been as short as they are. It's why sometimes leave churches. We get angry. I actually was this weekend having a conversation with a pastor. He was talking about conflict, and I just said, "So where do you teach conflict from?" And he kind of started telling me, and he started telling me, and I said to him, I said, well, you're like most guys. When you start with a conflict theology, you start in Matthew chapter 18, which is fine. But the problem with starting with Matthew 18 is that's the victim's approach. When someone's done me wrong.
Yeah.
And when Jesus, and the only reason Jesus even had that conversation is because somebody said, what do I do when somebody? But when Jesus initiated the conversation and he talked about it, he was in Matthew 5, and he started from his first statement is, when you see that someone is offended by you, or that you have offended someone. So he took the proactive, let's heal the relationship instead of respond because I've been offended. And so I think part of the reason that this is a great conversation and managing conflict, part of the reason we struggle with is because we wait until after it's happened and until there's offense, and then we position ourselves from the on the side of the offended instead of the side of the offender, which is definitely going to. So I just preached a whole little sermon there that I don't know if Dr. Jeannie has anything to add to that, or she said like that's not what I was going to talk about. But anyway.
Let's take a moment and hear a word about advancement.
This is Brian Hyatt, lead pastor at Cornerstone Church in Rowlett, Texas. I'm so thankful for the relationship that I have with Tim and the entire advancement team. Tim has invested in Cornerstone and myself, and we have seen tremendous results. Our attendance and giving are up 20 to 25% since we implemented the key strategies that he brought. Advancement has also helped us develop leaders so we have a more balanced team approach to ministry. For more information, please go to www.advancement.cc. You won't regret it.
Now let's get back to the podcast.
So what were you going to say? You give us your example.
Right. Well, in relational mastery, this really brings it all together, because in a conflict situation, especially, we also have to be thinking about ourselves and how to manage ourselves in a conflict situation.
Okay. Correct. Yes.
And then we have to be trying to understand what's going on here, what's really happening. And that's where the listening and analyzing piece comes in. And then we have to ask ourselves, okay, if I've really analyzed this conflict, what's the best case scenario and how can I foster that happening?
So I think the key here is that this is not this relational insight and relational mastery. We automatically, I think, put ourselves, say, well, this is always about the other person. But mastering this says, first, I start with me in this conflict or building trust or whatever. I start with me and I start with them, and I find the ground between. It's not just one or the other. It's not just you or me. It's us. I have to consider all the parties in the picture.
Right.
Okay. I'm just making sure I understand what you're saying.
Right, because I have to be continually aware of what's going on with me. Am I starting to get heated here? And, the thing of it is, when any of us experience the strong emotions of anger or fear, literally the reasoning part of our brain is not as so activated as the emotional part. We literally don't problem solve very well when we're angry. None of us. And that's why conflicts can get out of hand so quickly. So we have to really be aware, okay, am I starting to get angry? And if I am, I need to use my self-talk to cool myself down, or to say, I need to think about this, and can we meet later and continue the discussion?
So the fear and anger engage the emotional centers of our brain.
Yes.
Rather than the logical centers of our brain.
Right. And so if we're too angry or too anxious, we are not able to reason and problem solve. And so that's going to be important to know about whatever parties you're dealing with in a conflict situation, and as well as yourself. That's why things can get out of hand so quickly. People do and say things they shouldn't have said or that they regret later. So we have to make sure we're in a place where we can manage ourselves.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking back, because when we talk about conflict and we talk about trust in your list here, expectations and empowerment, early on in your book, you talk about you give a list of 6 things that are 6 of the biggest things that pastors deal with that are great challenges and where they need emotional intelligence. And one of them is your phrase is that they deal with resistance to change. And I think that as I'm thinking about relational mastery, I'm thinking about conflict. I think there's something interesting about the idea of these things around change, and that there usually is a resistance to change. But how does emotional intelligence help those guys, especially when the conflict's around? How does it help us as leaders navigate when we're leading a change moment?
Well, first of all, I think we have to be aware of what is driving the conflict, or what are other people's emotions. And usually in change, there's something about anxiety or fear of loss. But we need to hear it we need to tune in, because it could be different with different people. The number one conflict skill is listening. And not only listening, but reflective listening.
Yes.
Saying, okay, so let me make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So what you're saying is, when such and such happened, you felt this and you said this. And keep doing that until the person says, yes, that is what I'm saying. That way you're understanding what's going on, and the other person feels heard, because most times when people are getting more upset, it's because they don't feel heard. So that is a big de-escalation, is just listening and continually repeating back. You don't have to have really all the answers at the time. One of
the questions that we were trained to use in this moment is a reflective listening. If you're a pastor and you're trying to figure out some practical things here, one of the things that I remember being taught in this, to do what you said, or to just simply say to somebody, would you say that to me a different way?
Yes, that's a good one as well.
Say that to me a different way, so to make sure that I understand it. Because it also makes them process, it causes the person to process differently.
Right. And when they say it, it also sounds different to them.
Yes. Right. So it brings clarity. in those type of things. So relational mastery is a skill that ties to building trust, managing expectations, empowering, and managing conflict as primary things. And there's a lot of things that fall underneath those categories, obviously, right? And that in this, we need to, as the leaders, we have to be aware of when someone else's emotions, or since this is emotional intelligence, are going one way or the other, and manage our own in the process. That's what relational mastery is.
Right. It brings it all together. There's so many things you're having to do in that moment.
It's, you know, what I find in these moments is it's there's something mentally exhausting about those moments. I mean, it's just easier to just go.
So are you saying people are mentally exhausted?
People work is hard.
Yeah.
I mean, there are days.
It is. And you brought up something interesting, one of you did earlier, that sometimes we tend to let the conflict go. It's kind of underneath the surface. We let it go until it erupts or so much in our face that we have to deal with it. And it's probably better to begin addressing it, at least thinking through how to address it, even if we decide it's best to do nothing before the eruption.
In a few episodes back, we had Dr. Anthony Scome on, and we were talking about managing, leading a congregation in a politically charged season. And one of the things he said that he was taught early on in ministry was run to the conflict. Don't avoid it. Run to it and connect to it and be there, you know, see it from the beginning. And I think that that's, you know, the human nature is to avoid conflict.
Right. You know, this goes back to our mindset too, because we tend to think of conflict as a threat. Conflict is bad. It is a threat. And we can tell ourselves conflict can be an opportunity for growth. It can be an opportunity for people to understand each other better and work together better.
Well, the truth is, where there's no conflict, where there's no turmoil, might be a better word, there's really never going to be change.
Yeah.
I mean, even if we go back to what we talked about the very first part of this conversation, when we talked about looking inside and doing this personal reflection. I mean, the only reason I think the statement was made that insights often come when things aren't going right. I mean, that's a moment of turmoil. That's where there's personal, internal conflict or external conflict. Those are the moments where change actually happens. Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, without it, everything's just, we say we want smooth sailing, but after a while, I mean, there are people that like it, but for some of us, after a while, that gets old. I need a little action.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just a reality.
And, you know, if you know you're going to have to deal with the conflict, you can plan ahead. You can write down, you know, you can analyze the conflict, what you think is going on. You can write down how you want it to come out, what the other person might say, how you can respond. What are the best things for you to think? So you can prepare yourself mentally ahead of time. But really the key is think about what is the best way this can come out and how can I foster that?
So Todd, what's your takeaway from this final conversation with Dr. Jeannie today in this series?
I think what she said, and it was what's really important for us pastors to hear, is we are biologically incapable of reasoning when we're upset.
That was a great synopsis. That is a great way to.
And so for us as pastors to try to problem solve when people are upset is just not possible. And sometimes we just need to pastor them and understand where they are.
And at the same time, when we are personally upset, we've got to be able to step away and deal with that, or hand it off to somebody who's not. So, and it's okay. It's not an abdication. It's just reality. So Dr. Jeannie, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
If you want to get to know Dr. Jeannie a little more, again, you can go to her website at Dr. Jeannie Miller Clarkson. It's actually JeannieMillerClarkson.com. Don't put the doctor in front of it. Just JeannieMillerClarkson.com. You can find her ebook there. You can find her book, The Emotionally Intelligent Pastor, there. You can find this book also on Amazon. Follow her on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, and I assume Facebook too. I'm not connected there, but yes, she's nodding her head yes. So find her there. And she's a great resource to pastors and churches. And we appreciate her friendship.
Yes.
And we say thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I enjoy hanging out with you guys and having these discussions. They're so enriching.
Well, one day Todd's going to drive 1,010 miles. And
Well, you're going to have to go with me.
oh, maybe we'll make a road trip.
I'm not going by myself.
Anyway, it's great to see you
again. Come on up.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Jeannie, for being with us, and we appreciate it. We'll see everybody else next time on the Advancement Podcast.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.